Good evening and welcome to the Warrant Committee. It's January 22nd, Wednesday, 2025. Karen, can you take the roll for the meeting?
We have Tom Caldwell, Steve Rhines, Lori Connolly, Elizabeth Dillon, Jay Funlin, Julie Joyce is on Zoom, Andrew Coe, Peter Mon, and Ronald Sia, and Judy Steele are on Zoom. You have a quorum.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for being here. So I just wanted to just discuss with you a little change of plans for the meeting tonight. I was expecting to discuss the liquor articles tonight with Town Council, Attorney Mello. Attorney Mello and I spoke this afternoon, and due to a family emergency, was not able to make it for this evening. He will be coming tomorrow. So just to take a step ahead, tomorrow we're going to have schools in for final presentation on their 3 articles, including the new article on the Cunningham School project. So we've received a lot of information thus far. Obviously, the Cunningham article is brand new, but we've heard a lot about it, obviously. I have over the past couple of years here on the Warrant Committee, and obviously they were talking about it when they first came to us. So that would really set us up tomorrow. I would really like to have a vote on these 3 school articles tomorrow, in addition to the article allowing consumption of liquor on town premises. So I think that being said, if the members of the committee here can really try to prepare for tomorrow with the schools and just kind of be armed with all questions that you can have. And I understand that a colleague asks a question, you think of something new, and I understand that, but we are kind of up against the gun for the deadline for the article to go to the warrant to go to print. So I'd really like to see if we can wrap up all our business as printed in the warrant up to this point, completed, so we can start working on the comments. And then obviously, in terms of any citizen petitions or any other articles we may see, the select board is meeting next week. We could see something else, but I trust after town council finishes reviewing the zoning bylaws amendments that we'll have those to deal with in February. So that clear everybody? So tonight I'd like to get through the senior tax if we can. I know that was like kind of the odd conversation yesterday. And if we do have the bandwidth and we would like kind of detract, maybe we could consider a vote on the 5 liquor licenses that the town is looking for. Just kind of get that out of the way. And I'm just saying this in anticipation of tomorrow night. I'd like to avoid a Monday meeting or meetings next week. So those who have comments assigned can really we can work on those. You can work on those as a group, individually, and with me, just to get those over to the clerk and squared away. Now, even though Mr. Mello unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, our town administrator has agreed to come in on Zoom to answer some questions about the senior tax break and see maybe if he can help us kind of square that away. And I didn't say this to him, but if you do have some other maybe slight questions about anything else that's on here that we're looking at, maybe the liquor article, maybe our town administrator, Mr. Milano, could help us out on those. But like I said, he's agreed to fill the void for us so we can get something done tonight. So I really appreciate that on his part.
I had a question on the town issuing one-day liquor licenses. I was assuming that those were for sale, alcohol for sale at those events, or is it just, or is that another issue? I didn't notice in the article as I saw it, that whether this is an open bar or whether this is something that you pay per drink, assuming that there would be some cost associated with bringing in the caterer, and maybe they're looking to recoup, for example, the library. Having not been to one of those, any event where there has been alcohol, I wasn't sure whether this was, I think that changes the dynamic a little bit. but I didn't, sort of driving over here to myself, just kind of thought that I didn't see it clearly stated whether this was come in and have a drink, or come by and have a drink, or come by and buy a drink, buy a beer, so. Do we have any information on that? Did I miss anything?
Not that I can give you now, and you can talk to Mr.
Never
Milano
know.
about it. Does any member of the committee have any ideas on that? Comment?
I don't think we know. I think that was, you're right. I think that was one question that we weren't sure about.
I feel like there was talk of having it, you'd have a bar and a bartender, like you'd get somebody from the bar to man it. But if it's being sponsored by the chamber,
Yeah.
is the chamber collecting any revenue from it
Yeah.
versus the town, if the town is collecting? Maybe that's a positive.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of my own experiences, and I can't recall how how it worked.
Yeah. Well, it was sort of, once I had that thought, it was conspicuously absent in the article as to whether or not there was a pay to play, you know.
Let's see what our let's see what our outcome is.
Exactly.
He has his hand up, so.
Okay, so I'm sorry to take so long, Mr. Milano. You're recognized as always to speak. Sorry for the delay.
No problem. Good evening, everybody. Good day, everybody. But I don't know if I'm going to answer the question fully, but just kind of clarify what the proposed bylaw would allow is the sale or consumption and possession of alcohol on town property.
Okay.
And subject to approval by the select board and, the other entity that has care, custody, and control of that property. The more specific questions of how that would be administered are, questions for how we would manage that. Today, for one-day liquor licenses, they're issued to, the Eustis Estate, Forbes House, Milton Arts Center, those kind of groups that we don't necessarily interact with. We get, their insurance information, we get their backup information, and then the select board will issue the one-day license, which is for the sale of beer and wine or the sale of all alcohol beverages. So in terms of how would a town entity want to use its facility, that's kind of up in the air, and that town entity could bring in a caterer. I think, as we talked about last time, what we're responding to is those kinds of events down on the deck, and the history has been that while we've partnered with the chamber, and the chamber has brought in the caterer through Navarre Abbey Park. So that's been that kind of example. That's not the only way to do it, but that's, again, what we were responding to and trying to bring this forward. And how I would anticipate other boards and committees would want to, have an outside group be responsible for the sale. The question about Navarre, this would allow that technically, but it's not something I would foresee. And it could be, a policy of the board not to, authorize that, especially in town property where, that's just kind of a different kind of event, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
I guess while we're on, if you could, Mr. Milano, while we're on, and I know we're going to talk to Mr. Mello tomorrow, but is there any other question, taking advantage of Mr. Milano's time as to the liquor questions? Does anybody here have something for him in terms of? No questions, just intent of the select board, the language, any issues that you have. And I know Mr. Mello's coming tomorrow to discuss the liability. Liz?
I know it's sort of similar to what we had talked about before, but is there going to be any intent by the select board to kind of hear from the neighbors? So the chamber, for example, or whomever could put an event on at the deck, and that could be attended by anybody in town, but it's really the people that live right around there that might be affected by that. So is there any intention to listen to the people that live nearby, wherever the event is held? And also, is there going to be any limitation on, okay, we're going to have, like, say, a certain number of events per year on the deck, and not over that? Sort of a limitation, only once per, every quarter, or once per month, or not every day, or whatever it is, to sort of limit the impact on particular neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think the board is responsible to confirm that if one were to come forward or if it were to arise and take that into consideration. Again, I think where we're coming from is this is a blanket prohibition. Maybe it made sense once upon a time, but maybe we're in a place where it's time to move away from a blanket prohibition, take these events on a case-by-case basis, as we have tried to do until recently. I don't envision, monthly, weekly kind of routines. I think what we're anticipating is what we have seen over the past couple of years, which is 2, maybe 3. If there's an additional activation of that space, I think that might be great, but it's something we would have to consider if that came up. But right now, where we're responding to is less than a handful of events a year in one particular location, and then take it from there. Do we have plans or have we drafted any policies to date? No. I think our again, what we're reacting to is a few discrete events a year. If that became a bigger question, it's something we would want to address more formally. But for now, from where things stand today, we haven't taken any concrete steps on formulating a specific policy. And I can bring that request back to the select board that might, it's something folks might want to see, but it would be, a separate action from the bylaw change here.
Question.
Sure, Liz with the follow-up.
Sorry. So, the process by which someone could get permission or license or whatever to do this, would that happen in an open select board meeting where there would be comment by members of the community? Or is this the sort of thing that they would just work on separately? I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity for people, particularly people like me who live near the deck, and people who live sort of on that side of the highway, which I don't, but I know that they're very impacted by traffic, to have a say when it comes to the select board. And I take into account sort of what you're saying, and I do think that there's good intent here, but sometimes when we open the door, it's hard to close it again. So I guess my main question is that going to be a process in an open select board meeting where people would have an opportunity to weigh in before it would be granted? Would there be notice that there's a certain property, people would have an opportunity, a certain date, this is on the deck or wherever it is, people in the community who have an issue with it can come and speak to that, and then the select board can decide?
Right. So we would treat it like any other agenda item. Any of these, any kind of one-day license today, even for the chamber's events, and I don't want to just use that as the sole example, but in those examples, they have to come to the select board for permission to use the deck. That goes on an agenda. Every select board meeting has public comment is set aside at every meeting. The members and myself are always available by email or by phone ahead of meetings, around meetings. But, yes, is it an open, is it an agenda item on a select board meeting? Yes. Is there public comment at all those meetings? Yes. Is there necessarily public comment taken around every request for an event? Not particularly, but folks who want to come to speak on any issue have that opportunity at the beginning of any select board meeting, and obviously opportunities to reach out to members directly or to myself directly ahead of when actions are taken. But so it would be multiple different approvals. Right now, for events on property under the select board's control, you have to submit and sign off on an application, and our policy to use that land, it goes to select board meeting. That would continue in this case, except it would be a second approval for a one-day license for that location.
Thank you, Nick. Judy, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. are we just talking to Nick now about the liquor licenses, or were you opening Nick up to any questions that might be on the agenda tonight?
Well, Judy, I think we started with the liquor questions, so
Okay.
I'd like to keep it to this and then just move over to the senior tax break.
No,
So
I wasn't sure if Nick was staying for the whole meeting or he was just here for a short space of time.
Nick's the
I
town
am
administrator is here just to answer.
Okay, thank you, Nick and Tom.
Thank you, Judy. Does anybody have any questions just about potentially the liquor license or the 5 liquor licenses to the town? Now that we have the town administrator here.
What prompted the change? Or how did this article?
Well, Mr. Milano, I think you spoke to that a little earlier. I think you indicated that there was the select board or others were approached concerning having fundraisers and get-togethers on various town properties. So the member just wanted to know, like what started this article? How did it get going?
Yeah, we had a group approach us about a fundraiser in a town building, and we had initially said, let's, that would include beer and wine. And we had said, nothing from our perspective would prohibit that. Let's, just check with town council and we'll get back to you. And it was at that point, council pointed us to this bylaw that was still on the books. So it was just a matter of, here's a bylaw that's been in place. Should we keep it in place, or is it time to revisit it? I approached the select board about it, and that's kind of what drove it. And in addition to that, the regular events down at the deck in terms of a Halloween stroll and the holiday tree lighting, they've been using the Art Center property as a location for beer and wine service, and it was like, if it would make sense to expand that to the deck itself for discrete events, that might be something the select board's willing to consider, but with the bylaw on the books, we didn't want to do anything until we could update it or bring it to town meeting with a request to change it. So that was kind of the genesis behind it.
Got it. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
Any other questions about the liquor?
It might be really more of a question for Attorney Miller, but I'm just curious about how we're making sure that people are of age to be drinking at these events. I guess it's the bartender's problem if there is one, but I
Enforcement.
don't know if that's the case, that there will be a bartender at these events. And or how do you keep people from bringing their own alcohol from home?
You can't, but I think you have to have, at registered events, you have to have a tips trained bartender, right?
Yeah. I think that's what, and I'm sorry, Mr. Milano,
Yeah.
that's what I had discussed with town council today, and I think he's going to present on, he has obviously a series of thoughts regarding insurance, tipped bartenders, like those things to obviously keep the liability to the town at the barest minimum, if anything were to happen. So he can speak to that. I don't know, Mr. Milano, if you have any comments just about the liability enforcement or that type of thing?
Right. No, I think especially where it's our property, we would want to approach it. A charity can approach it differently if they're using their own property, and it's kind of up to them. If a hall or a use estate is, however they want to run that, they can do that under their own, as they see fit in terms of what they want to see as their own liability. But for us, obviously, we would want to approach it differently. We've talked about this with our insurance provider. They, have recommendations on how the liability insurance should read, how the town should be covered. So anytime we have an event on town property, we make sure we're indemnified, that we have insurance coverage that meets the recommendation of our insurance provider, that the town is an additional insured. If there's a contract between the parties, they'll review the contract. So that's kind of our run-of-the-mill process for approving events anyway, and I would carry over obviously with the particular detail to to liquor in this case. But I agree with what, Tom's points about how we've had those conversations with town council and would be able to make sure we're taking the steps to limit our exposure as much as possible.
So Mr. Mello had a series of recommendations I think he's going to impress upon the town, which I think really, frankly, in speaking to him and in Nick's comments, the town has been following up to this point in this theater regarding alcohol sales, and he would obviously recommend that it extend obviously now to the town property. But we'll hear from him tomorrow, and he can break it down. Are there any other questions for Mr. Milano as to this issue? Right? Okay. So to be continued until tomorrow evening, these two bylaws. Town Administrator Milano, I was just wondering, there were a series of questions. We had a robust discussion last evening about the senior, I just call it the senior tax break article. And I know we had shared some questions that were posed by various members of the board. So I just kind of wanted to open it up to that, Mr. Milano, and open it up to the floor if you're okay with that. Maybe see if we can figure out some of these questions.
No, happy to.
Okay. So I got some emails from people. I shared them. So whoever wants to go first, and please don't hold back. Member Dillon?
Did you send Mr. Milano my 5 summary
I
questions?
certainly did.
Okay.
Ms. Milano, Ms. Dillon has some questions for you.
Now I summarize other things that I heard other people say, so I can just ask my own questions,
Okay.
and then other people can ask their own questions.
Perfect.
Okay. So one of the things that we had talked about was the language. I didn't number it in my own email here, but it was the qualifying. It's part of section 2. The qualifying parcel is owned by 1, a single taxpayer, age 65 or older, or 2, jointly by 1 or more taxpayers, so long as the owner is age 65 or older. Thank you. It's section 2B. So we had talked a lot about a lot of us lawyers decided to kind of have a lawyerly approach to it and kind of think about it. So, for example, if 2 people own the property and one of them were 65 years old and they owned a very minimal amount, like 1% of the property, and that individual who's 65 or older qualified for the circuit breaker, and the other owner was 60 years old or older and they owned 99%, but they would not qualify for the circuit breaker, and that 99% owner was very wealthy. So they had a lot of assets, they had a lot of money, they had a lot of income, whatever. Would that entire property then get a tax break because the taxpayer who qualifies for the circuit breaker would apply, and they are one individual who is domiciled, owns the property, is 65 and older, and has lived there for a period of over 10 years? Our question is, if somebody owns it jointly, not everybody has to qualify for the circuit breaker the way that this is written. And so what if you own it jointly with someone who has very high income? That person, as it's written too, getting to my second point, need not even live in Milton so long as the applicant lives in Milton. And so we're just wondering about sort of the intent of the select board in that situation. And if that's not their intent, is there a way that we can kind of firm up that language?
But I mean, in terms of percent of ownership, I think we didn't get into that because now we're making this more and more difficult to administer. And part of the approach has been, we're not trying to put too much of a burden on the assessor's office. And then the other element is also to keep in mind that the entry into this is whether or not you qualify for the senior circuit breaker income tax credit. So in that case, there's different income thresholds for people who are filing jointly or filing separately. So Could there be a situation where there's two homeowners living together, they file separately, and the applicant who submits their paperwork to the town is the one who qualified for it, not the other one who qualified for it? Yeah, I guess, yes, that is possible. But that
Even if
is,
they're siblings or one is a parent and a child, they're not married, something like that.
yeah, it just requires them to be co-applicants. It doesn't require them to be spouses or anything else. That first entry of being qualifying for the state tax credit, you know, whoever is applying for the credit from Milton, the exemption from Milton, has to have met all that criteria. And that's where, you know, filing jointly or filing as a head household might come in and limit some of those situations, but no, the language, could that scenario play out under the language? Yes, it could.
Okay, and then our next question was regarding this language. So if the applicant taxpayer, or at least one of the joint applicants, has been domiciled or owned a residential unit of real property for at least 10 consecutive years. So we had a lot of discussion about two sorts of things. One, if a person were to own a property in Milton for, say, 30 years, they have to move outside of Milton. Maybe they still own their home, but they rent it out to someone else because they have to leave to live someplace else for a few years, you know, to take care of an ill family member because they themselves are ill for whatever reason. They move back to Milton, live here 9 years, same house that they've owned the whole time, but they weren't domiciled there. This person's contributed to Milton for 39 years. Technically, they wouldn't be able to participate in this program until the next 10th year that they've lived here. So we were just discussing, I was discussing my concern that, sure, it might be an edge case, but we're thinking of a lot of edge cases. I want to make sure that all of our senior citizens who've contributed to our community can get the benefit of this if that's the select board's intention.
Yeah, and we had talked about that when I was back from the Warrant Committee a couple weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to speak with the board as a whole in terms of their take on this. I think, again, we were kind of tracking what other communities had done. A lot of communities have the 10 years in ownership. We didn't, from a policy perspective, disagree with that approach. You raise fair points. I think what we brought forward tracked with what other communities have done, and we felt reflected, 10 years wasn't a lifetime, but it was a significant time to have owned previously. But if there's an interest in expanding the pool to ensure you're capturing people who may have rented or like, lived here, moved out for a couple of years, came back, but have been here, more or less for their, most of their life, then the language could be amended to make it broader. That's certainly, it's a comment I plan to discuss with the board at our meeting on the 28th, but it's not something I today can kind of respond in terms of select board's perspective on it. I'm less concerned about the person who works at Milton Academy and lives in a house owned by Milton Academy that hasn't been paying property taxes. That, for one, isn't really gonna bother me if they miss out on it. But I do get your point in terms of potential folks who have rented in town, or who have, stepped away and for a couple of years or come back or whatever the case may be. The language today the language as drafted would not allow for those cases. But there's reasons to tweak that or change that if folks feel that it's important to grab additional folks or expand that eligibility.
Judy was up.
Julia.
Julia, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So my understanding of the state circuit breaker tax exemption is that renters are eligible, but it looks like that is not something that Milton has chosen to go with as well. Was there any discussion around including renters in this article?
There's no real mechanism for us to exempt money paid by renters, because this is all just not based on property taxes. So if you're renting properties, certainly your rent contributes to your landlord's property taxes, but it mechanically, there's no way for us to ensure that any kind of exemption trickles back to that renter. And I wouldn't even know the ways to structure it. So it's a property tax exemption, so it has to go to homeowners the way it's structured.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Lori,
I forgot what I was going to say now.
how's that?
I forgot what I was going to say now.
Well, how about I go to Liz Dillon and then
That's
back to you?
great. That'd be great. That'll come back to me.
And you do have Judy now.
I had a thought.
And then I got Judy. So Liz, Lori, Judy.
Kind of following up on Julia's point, I think one of the things that we had talked about was not the renters applying for this benefit while they're still renters. I think it was someone who could have rented a property in Milton, has like a lease, can show that they rented it for, the past 10 years, and then purchases a house. And then for that time that they purchase the house, say, well, I've owned this house for 5 years and I've rented for the past 30 years, but I'm not eligible for that tax break because I've only owned my home for 5 years. I think that was one of the things that we were saying. A person who's a senior citizen could have contributed in a different way, sure, but lived here for 35 years and then because they only own their home for 5 years. So I guess my point really is just, it's not necessarily, my thoughts, although, I think they're valid, but also just trying to understand what was talked about by the select board, what was kind of their intention, and then making sure that the language reflects that. And then if we disagree, fine, but I just want to make sure that this language isn't vague at all so that it isn't like a subject of a lot of fighting down the road. If it can be kind of clarified, then I would be happy to, think about that as well. I don't know if you wanted me to bring up the other two questions that people had, or other people can ask them. They weren't mine. I just emailed them to you.
I can bring them up.
Okay. And then Lori had something to say.
Lori, you ready?
Oh, I am. I was just going to comment, though, if we have the assessors managing this program and reviewing it, and we have the one person out of 400 that might apply that goes out of state for 2 years, I would think they could make the case to the assessors in an appeal type format, Nick, potentially, that they might be able to get an exception. I mean, I feel like, as Liz said, we're looking at all the edge issues, and are we going to be able to come up with every single scenario of somebody's situation that might require or qualify them for the break? But yet we can't. I mean, it's like the liquor license that we were just talking about. Well, what if this happens? Or what are the parameters around how the select board is going to approve? Is it a board or a committee? What if it's a group of people that just want to have a function on a town property? What are the requirements for that? Like, we're trying to, it's like the local historic district where like, oh my, it's like we're trying to write so much into it that it seems very onerous, that we don't necessarily have the policies for the liquor license. I went through a number of communities today. They have taken the standard language. It is standard in every one of them that I looked at. It's working. It seems to be working. We could revisit it after we determine if there's problems. If there's 1,000 people knocking at the assessor's door saying, I have this exception, you didn't include me, and it becomes a problem, then we address it. If there's an issue with 75 events that people want to throw on town property with liquor, with a liquor license, we'll have to revisit it. Seems like we're trying to make it harder than it might be. After spending a few hours today going through all this stuff.
Okay,
Just
thank
my
you.
2 cents.
Judy.
Thank you. I was reviewing section 2G. And the applicant in regards to applicants having excessive assets. So I'm just gonna run through this. I went through the whole circuit breaker. I read every page, every word, and I know there were people that were concerned about if you had too many monetary assets. But in order to get the circuit breaker from the state, you have to include Schedule B, non-mass bank interest, dividends, and short-term cap gains. You have to include Schedule D, long-term cap gains or distributions. Schedule Y, which has to do with certain deductions. I believe that the circuit breaker for the state covers a lot of those concerns. So if you pass through all these schedules and documents you have to provide to employ those schedules that are necessary to get this circuit breaker, then our Board of Assessors can basically not have to do that work. It's already been done at the DOR. However, I did hear, and I can't remember whether it was Nick Connor or you, Mr. Milano, it had to have been you in one of your presentations, that the excessive assets for our town would be viewed as additional property ownership. Whether it be in town, out of state, just if you have an additional property. And how, on your application, do you envision that where that would be and how it would play out? Would the applicant merely state, I have a house, in Howard. I have a house in Vail, Colorado. And I have a house in, some snow mountain in Vermont to ski. And it would be self-reported. Is that how you envision it on the asset? I am in favor of keeping schedule of section G in section 2. I firmly think it's a good thing to check for property assets, because the circuit breaker is already taken care of, your fidelity accounts, etc. So could you answer that, how you found, let's say, Wakefield or other towns addressed if they had that clause?
They've included as a question on their application. Obviously, it would take a lot of homework for somebody to actually hunt down somebody, whether they own something far away. So it's included as a question on the application about whether the applicant owns any other property. The Board of Assessors could say we don't view additional property as an excessive asset, and they won't include that on their application. But in our experience in talking to other communities, that's typically what they really limit it to just asking about additional property. Otherwise, it's, once you've qualified for that senior circuit breaker through the state, you're pretty much considered eligible locally as long as you meet the other requirements in the home rule petition. But yes, Judy, to your point, it's been focused primarily on additional property, and it's typically a question on the application that the person has to answer and fill out and sign.
Okay, thank you.
Julie has her hand up.
Julie.
Hey there, thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I used to work for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and we handled all the affordable housing applications. And when we went through to vet people to see if they qualified for these, it wasn't just it wouldn't have been an option for one person who owned a slight percentage of a house. We wanted the entire household income. So if you had two people who were joint owners of a property, both incomes would usually have to go into that application. And as far as somebody who, if they left the state and they left for a couple of years and then to come back, if they still owned the house in a situation where we were thinking, that they rented it out, that rental income is reflected upon as income. So that is always going to end up in the income category. The house is still an asset. So most of those things would probably already have been gone through by the program before it would even get to the assessor's office, I would think, because for them to have to go through applications and try to figure out if somebody owns a house out of state or whatever, I think would be brutal for the town to have to do that. But I think a lot of the concerns that people have, the valid concerns that everybody just sort of mentioned, should have already been, before it would get to us, that those applications would be vetted. So you already look at income, assets, but anybody who leaves a house for a year or two, very few people would have the ability to leave a house vacant and not collect some sort of rent from people, and you are required to disclose rental payments. So I think that would probably handle a lot of that, and that's about it. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Liz, in terms of the two questions, I'm as I'm reading them, they some of them have been answered. Do you want to just take the reins with what you wrote?
Do you mind if I just find that email
No,
to
no.
you? I'm sorry.
At all. Ms. Muller, we just have, there are a couple more questions from last evening that we sent to you. Just want to make sure we've covered everything.
Yeah, which ones?
Is it 4 and 5?
No, it was 1 and 5, but I think we already answered 1. So it's really just 5. We had different feelings about the excessive assets and the role of the Board of Assessors in determining whether or not to deny an application based on the fact the person has excessive assets. And what that would entail, what excessive assets mean. Again, this wasn't really my question, so if
No, I
other
understand.
people want to firm it up, but I just wrote them all down.
Yeah. Nick, I can a little bit. I mean, not much more, but I think, we've had conversations about fines for historical violations and fences going in wrong places. And there was a real, lot of concern about just money and that types of stuff and who sets the bar on fines or anything. But how would they determine excessive assets? And would there be a table? How would they, if you know?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think where we have seen it limited to in other communities is what we would anticipate most likely would be limited here would be that question about additional property, and really that's it. The board could feel, additional questions are warranted. We've left it open-ended for that purpose. However, throughout this process, we felt it's important, it's helpful to track to how communities have implemented this, how it's been successful elsewhere. So I think what we have found is other communities have focused on the excessive assets, meaning just the additional property. However, the language would certainly allow the Board of Assessors to put something more formal or more extensive into place if it's so desired. Or they could say, hey, look, this is working on the communities. Let's kind of follow their lead, see how it goes, and if adjustments are necessary, if they get alerted to some issues. But as currently written, it would defer that, policy formulation, for lack of a better phrase, to the Board of Assessors. And I expect where we would land is recommending that we stick to the additional property, like other communities, and see how the program goes from there.
Can I ask a question of Julie Joyce? Julie, you there?
Yep, I am.
What would the BRA do in your experience? Do they go after the excessive assets? How do they look at it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because what we would find is folks would be retired, so their income, their 1099 W-2 income, would put them right into the category to get into whatever units they want. So we we were finding retirees were able to get into these luxury units at like the Mandarin Oriental or over in Charlestown, and they had massive amounts of assets in retirement funds, you know, IRAs, vacation properties or something. So there was an awful lot of money that we weren't able to count at first. So that kind of had to come back in and say, all right, we have an asset columns. We also had, and it was age dependent as well. So people who were older were allowed to have retirement and things like that built up if they weren't currently sort of collecting income on a regular basis. But we had to be, you know, you have to kind of be careful about that. We had different income categories, you know, for just like the affordable housing units that you're going to see at, you know, the Ice House or anywhere else, depending on the median income, the 50%, 80%, 90%, you know, 100% units. But they're very, very strict. So they would go right through your Schedule C income. They would, which is where you would sort of all of your interest would show up. So your investment properties, which would sort of trigger a, hey, that person owns a vacation property, or that they rent out, or they rent out their other property, and any sort of other business income, things like that. So that's sort of how they handled it.
Okay. Thank you, Julie.
That's helpful. You're welcome.
Oh, Jay.
Yeah, I think this is a question for Nick. So one of our colleagues said a few minutes ago that the Board of Assessors could approve someone if they would otherwise be denied, or at least that's what I heard. Now, if I read this, I don't see it that way. I see it if somebody does not meet A, B, C, or D, they just don't get this credit, and the Board of Assessors has no ability to give them this credit. Am I reading that correctly, Mr. Milano?
Yes, there's no language that would authorize them to waive or, you know, qualify some of the other basic qualifications. So as an entry point, you have to have met those first four, or however many. Like, but
Okay.
Language today does not allow the Board of Assessors to say, hey, you've been here, you know, 30 of the last 40, but not some of the last 10. So, but we'll still let you in. That wiggle room or lack of flexibility exists in the way we've drafted it.
Thank you.
One of the questions that I asked yesterday, and I think is pertinent, still pertinent, is what was the spirit of this article? I mean, was it, I had assumed it was to keep long-term homeowners in their homes in the face of rising property taxes. Is that the case, or was there a different rationale? And the reason I asked that question is that I think there are a lot of valid points that people had brought up, except they're not perfect analogs to what this article is. And so whether we're talking about the Boston Housing Authority or a circuit breaker, those are tied to specific individuals and instances. In this case, the language is a little loose, so you could have an ownership group that is not necessarily myself and my spouse. And not everybody has to qualify for the circuit breaker. And so that's why I think the spirit is really critical for me in order to say, yes, I agree with the language as is, or I have serious problems with it. So I guess my question is, what was the genesis of this, and what's the intent of the group of individuals we're trying to protect?
No, I think you hit it right on. It's envisioned as a way to help shift some of the burden away from seniors onto everybody else in town, especially as we contemplate, when we were first kicking this around, it was an operating override and a potential school project ballot question that would have an impact on tax bills. So it was envisioned as a way to, address and mitigate some of that. That's where the genesis came from. We had been talking to other communities in terms of when they've tackled overrides and big project ballot questions and debt exclusions. We were approaching it from just to take an even further step back, we were saying, okay, have we done everything we can to maximize revenue for the town? That's question A. And question B is, are there ways to minimize or mitigate some of the impact on those who are on fixed incomes? So, from a revenue perspective, didn't come up with many great ideas. The growth conversation is one that Milton's always been having. We do have a grant for an economic development master plan with the Massachusetts Area Planning Council that's underway. So we're exploring that pathway. And then on mitigating some of the impacts, this was something that actually the town of Hingham flagged for us as something that they had just done. And then from there was additional conversations with other folks, particularly on the North Shore, about how they've put this into effect as well. So that's kind of the genesis of it, and squarely to it to help mitigate and address some of the tax burden issues or tax impact issues over the next few years.
Great, that's really helpful, and that sort of further hardened my resolve that I would love to see the language tightened a little and potentially also give the assessors a little bit of leeway in both direction in terms of disqualifying people with the applicants or an applicant group associated with particular property with excessive assets, as well as creating exceptions for protecting really who this is intended to protect. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the renters or people that have left for a period of time and come back, but again, I'd love to see this tightened up a little and also give the assessors some degree of discretion without creating an undue burden on them from an administrative standpoint.
Liz?
I remembered another thing that I forgot to include in my email to you. So one of the things that you had mentioned, Mr. Milano, was when you had originally come in the first time to talk about this, and you just reminded me of this when you were talking, but you had said that the idea was this would go hand in hand with an override. And I was wondering if the select board considered language sort of conditioning this on there being such an override or the debt exclusion in the event that townspeople don't vote for those things. I'm not saying that senior citizens don't still deserve a tax break. I think they do. But since you had mentioned that the idea was this would go hand in hand with an override, if an override doesn't happen, should this be conditioned on an override, in which case this would go away? The reason why you had said that you would do it before an override is to get ahead of the legislative, because it would have to be approved by the general court, is my understanding. So I'm just curious about whether that condition was discussed being in there or not.
It was not something we had or contemplated.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Milano? Or comments? Maybe regarding section 3 or 4? Anything on those sections that may be of interest? Section 5, Lori?
I have a question, Nick, we talked about this, the 50% to 100% of the amount of the circuit breaker tax credit. So I think the statute, as Jay, we talked about last night, was $1,500. But I think currently you had indicated that the total credit is $2,730. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, the credit increase in the last tax bill that was passed. So it's now, So it's, yeah, I think you had said 2030. I don't have the number right in front of me. But, yeah, and I know of one community that had the match at 150% of the tax credit, and they actually are dialing that back to 100% match, reflecting the fact that the credit itself had just been increased. So we had been arranged, only because this is as a special act. If you put something specific in a special act, it takes another special act to change it.
Right.
So we felt a range was that would give the board flexibility. So I think the conversation that we have had to date has been setting it as when the program kicks off at a 50% match. The language would allow a range from 50 to 100% at the select board's selection.
And that could change every year.
In theory, yes, it could, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Judy has her hand.
Judy?
Hi, in regards to whether or not there is an override, I think we have to keep in mind that, again, if you pay attention to your tax bills, I caught you, Nick. It's been increasing every year, just under 2.5%. So, bearing that in mind, every year, all of us, whatever age group we're in, your tax bill has gone up just under the 2.5%. Now take into effect that the COLAs for Social Security went up 2.5% for the year 2025. So if you bounce that math around on a napkin, you're going to see that for those people, which is what this article is really about, they're barely keeping ahead in that regard. If you match those two things, they got a 2.5% COLA and their taxes went up just under 2.5 for the year. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Are there any other members that have any questions as to the tax break article? Any of the sections? Comments?
I
Jay?
guess I've been
Please.
holding off because, we were asking, it's not a question for Mr. Milano.
Oh, okay. You may be able to help though. Maybe.
Oh, no, it was just musing among us. So
Okay.
if we're asking for questions for Mr. Milano, no.
Okay. You sure everybody, are we satisfied with this? Okay. Ms. Milano, the fact that I have you here and our schedule kind of got a little bumpy, just in terms of what I was planning on doing tonight and tomorrow. Could you very briefly talk about the Brook Road Overlay District?
Sure. I think I probably talked about it quickly. I don't even know if I talked about it. So it is a zoning bylaw amendment that has been submitted by the planning board. The genesis of it is that there have been some court decisions that came down that said that if you adopt an overlay or plan unit development zoning bylaw amendment, that is not truly adopted unless you have also voted to amend your zoning map to incorporate that planned unit development or overlay district onto your zoning map. Oftentimes when these come forward, they'll say to amend the zoning bylaws as X, Y, and Z, and to amend the zoning map to show it as this area. In this case, it was an oversight that they didn't. So it's pretty much a housekeeping item to say we have these two overlay district plan unit developments in our zoning bylaws, but they didn't formally make it onto the map. So now they're asking town meetings to just correct that action and oversight. So the first one is the Milton Village mixed use plan unit development area or overlay. So this is down over on Milton Village side. So it would allow additional growth down there, and additional height under certain provisions. No projects have come forward under this as of yet. And the other was very, very narrow overlay district on Brook Road. And I can just pull that. I can pull it more quickly. So I'm showing here the Brook Road one. As you can see, it's covering what is essentially what 3 parcels now, 2 tax parcels, would allow a small project at this location. So both of these, this is the Brook Road overlay, and the Warrant, there are images as well. This is the Milton Village overlay here. Both of these are in the zoning bylaw. They're in effect today. We just have a little bit of a housekeeping item to get them officially onto the map.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. And these are housekeeping issues, as you indicated. Correct?
Yes, yeah, they're in the zoning bylaws, they're just not on the map. And the courts are now saying it's effective unless they're both the bylaws and on the map. So this just cleans that up.
Okay, great. Okay. Anybody have any questions to Mr. Milano regarding the 2 maps and the overlay? Okay, I'm going to again ask any questions about the senior tax break from Mr. Milano, and any questions just concerning any of the 2 liquor articles.
They did have a question about the overlay.
Okay, we have a question about the overlay, Mr. Milano, by Member Dillon.
Okay, do your best.
Just a really brief question. So I understand what the first one was for, but what was the second? I understand it's just an administrative thing. I'm just curious. What did the second overlay do? So it says it to add 2 planned unit developments.
Which?
The very small one on Brook Road.
Yeah, sorry, let me pull it. My understanding initially was that the property owners down there were considering like a small townhome type development, and this overlay made that possible. And then by the time it was approved, I think one of the parcels actually got sold, so then it never went anywhere. So the 2 parcels are not in common ownership anymore.
They should be condemned.
And it was a special permit. So it's a special permit for a townhouse development containing not more than 6 townhouse units in 2 or 3 unit buildings. So that was the intention. I don't have the full backstory and history on what happened. I believe that I think somebody was trying to do a project there, and either one of the properties sold or something, or the interest faded away. It's still on the book, and that's an old Metro Clement building, maybe.
Yes.
It's a little run down now, which is one of the 2 parcels that's over there.
Run down, that's an overstatement. It needs to be condemned. It's been on my list to write to the Board of Health to suggest that they condemn it, as is the house next door with all the windows open, broken and open and falling down. It's a hazard.
All right.
Thank you, Liz, for that question. Any other questions about the districts?
No. No.
Okay, Mr. Milano, I think not seeing any hands raised, or I think any other questions for you. I really appreciate you coming in here and helping out and answering some of these questions.
Sure. And Mr. Chair, if there are questions, I don't know where you're taking the meeting, but if you're going to talk about the other articles or open it up, I'm happy to stick around if that's the case. If you're sticking to what you've done so far, up to you. And so if you want me to stick around, I'm happy to.
Well, I appreciate that, Nick, just because we're kind of up against the gun. And right. I know it's a little, we had a plan about tonight, and it's kind of gone sideways a little bit. But I would like to open it up to the committee. If there's something that's been burning you all week, and here's your chance with Mr. Milano. Just as to, I know we've already voted for the PEG Access Enterprise and the lead service line, but anything about the schools from the town administrator's perspective? Any questions for any of those? No? The new Cunningham project?
Yes.
The new...
Yes.
So, Mr. Milano, could you sent along to us a new article presented by the school building committee, I believe, for renovation of the third and fourth floors of the Cunningham, I was going to say junior high school, elementary school. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What should be considered a draft article into this draft warrant. I know you're hearing from the school folks tomorrow. So that was our first kind of quick stab at trying to put something together. I have it with our bond counsel for them to review to make sure the language is adequate and sufficient. But what generally, what the article would, the article obviously is the only thing that would be subject to our control is just putting the town meeting members on notice as to what would be discussed, so that the article itself is pretty straightforward. I wouldn't expect too much change to that, but the article, here, so we're looking at it together. So the article would see if the town will appropriate, borrow, transfer from available funds an amount of money for the purpose of the renovation project on the third and fourth floors of the Cunningham School. The real granular detail for the project itself, I've put in a draft motion because that's where we would spell out the particulars a little bit more. The proposed budget is, the proposed appropriation is another $3.5 million approximately, which would bring the total appropriation for this project to $5.5 million. If folks recall, last year, a $2 million borrowing authorization was included in the capital budget in Article 4 that went to town meeting last year. And that was based on recommendations of expected potential square foot costs of what that project would entail. Once the preliminary design work started and really understanding existing conditions, what it would take to work on the space, it became apparent that budget estimate was much too optimistic and didn't quite contemplate the full project. And so the school committee had requested that additional money be appropriated for this purpose, which is about $3.5 million. And this would entail, a two-phase project to add additional space on the fourth floor, at the Cunningham School, which is pretty unused now, and construct additional classrooms on the third floor where the library is today. So that's the scope of the project itself. I don't really want to get into details of the project, and I'll let the school speak to that. I'm happy to talk about the article, the motion, or the financial pieces of it, if any of that is helpful.
Jay.
Yeah, Mr. Milano, I would like, and I think I sent you an email about this a week or two ago, ask about the financing and how this is going to affect the ongoing budget. For example, we can start with this one, the Cunningham one. That's, I think, simple math, but if we borrow $3.5 million, what does that turn into in a annual cost? It's not simple math in the sense that it requires predicting interest rates, which no one can do, but making a guess on interest rates. How is that going to affect the annual budget, and will that hit the budget starting next year, starting the year after? Questions like that. And then it gets a little more complicated with the feasibility study, because we're getting 45% of that covered, and we may or may not do a debt exclusion in the future. So if we could get something from, I don't know if it's the treasurer or Ms. Dexter, it could be in writing, it doesn't necessarily need to be a personal appearance, but if we approve the $1.5 million, do we, and I know you already answered part of this in an email, but do we go to Wall Street and issue a bond for $1.5 million and then get reimbursed for 45% of it? I think the answer you gave me is no, that's not how it works. We get reimbursed first and issue the bond second. But so for both of these, and I don't want to put you on the spot now, but maybe for tomorrow, some sense of how it affects the ongoing budget, and especially with the feasibility study is going to be sticky.
Sure, and I'll plan to be listening in tomorrow's meeting, so if questions or I'll provide some answers now, and then maybe if there's some follow-up discussion tomorrow, I'm happy to participate in that. So it might be easier to kind of go in inverse order and talk about the feasibility study first, if that's okay. And I agree, it's a little trickier in a sense because there's the reimbursement piece to consider. But I have a quick one page right here. But just to take a kind of a bigger step back in terms of how the town issues debt, we can issue short-term notes called bond anticipation notes or bands. And that would mean we borrow money on a short-term basis. Typically, it could be 30 days, it could be a year. We wouldn't pay any principal in that, we would just pay interest. So, borrow $10 million on a short-term note, pay 4% interest a year later, and then borrow long-term after that. The reason you might issue bands is if you're building your bigger projects and you're not ready to issue the full debt for the full amount, because just from a cash flow perspective, you don't need all that money up front. So for the fire station project that we built, the town issued short-term notes for a couple of years before issuing any long-term debt. So we paid interest, but not principal for a couple of years, and now we've issued some long-term debt. The reason I mention that is because for a feasibility study appropriation, where we're designing something that is going to be subject to a vote for the full project appropriation, it might make sense in that case if we're in need and if we need to bring in money, we would bring it in on a short-term basis until the full project is voted upon, and then issue some long-term debt once the full project is approved, if it's approved. So that was straight from what
I'm sorry, we can't. I can't understand you. You cut out about 15 seconds ago.
Oh, sorry. So I'll just refer to this slide to walk through it. So for the feasibility study appropriation, Milton has to appropriate the $1.5 million, as we talked about, I think, in our prior meeting. It doesn't mean we're going to spend all of that money right away. And here's just a little bit of timeline here. So we're beginning with eligibility period, and we talked a bit about that in our last meeting. In the fall, presumably, if we've completed all of our tasks in eligibility period, MSBA will invite us into the feasibility study. So we will have appropriated the money, we will have formed the newer, bigger school building committee. We've completed all of our other tasks. We signed an agreement with the school building authority for a feasibility study agreement that stipulates what we'll study. We go through consultant procurement in the winter. The feasibility study might start in the spring. And if the town has spent money through June 30th of 2025 that hasn't been reimbursed by the MSBA, we will have to issue a short-term note to cover that. And then the study will continue until the following year, approximately. This is just kind of a made-up timeline to illustrate the purpose of it. And then if, again, there's still a deficit at the end of that fiscal year, there might be another short-term note. And then my point of bringing this all up is likely for the feasibility study appropriation, we won't issue a bond until the full project is voted upon. And so the cost for the feasibility study would be minimal on our budget, and it'd also be much delayed because we won't borrow the money until August of 2026. It's usually a one-year note, so now we're not making a payment on that until August of 2027, which is fiscal year 2028. So it gets complicated to kind of map it out, but there is kind of a lagging effect in terms of projects that are funded by bonding from when they show up on our budget. So, and that's especially the case with the feasibility study appropriation because A, we're not going to be paying 100% of the cost, we'll get reimbursed, and B, if the project is approved by voters, we would roll all these expenses into the full project appropriation, and then borrow, a 30-year bond at some point for $60 million for the first portion of the project. So I know that isn't the most straightforward explanation, but it just speaks to that lagging effect in terms of a borrowing authorization and when it shows up on our budget. And that is also the case with the Cunningham project. And the Cunningham project, obviously a bigger cost at $5.5 million. It's a permanent change to that space. So that could be borrowed for up to 30 years for facility improvements. And what we would expect to do is have some added costs in the fiscal 26 budget, and those are already rolled in as part of our expectations for fiscal 26. Because that project is expected, they're designing it, working on it, expected to go out to bid in the spring if the full appropriation is approved. Phase 1 is anticipated to take place this summer. So we would expect to issue some debt associated with that in the fall. Some of it could impact fiscal 26, but really the brunt of it would show up in fiscals 27 and 28. And I'll just get I'll submit to the committee a little bit of background in terms of what that cost would be and when we expect it to show up, to put some numbers behind the commentary. So that wasn't too complicated other than just kind of speaking to that kind of lagging effect of the cost showing up and impacting our budgets.
Jay, do you have anything to follow up?
Just to put a number on it. So if we're spending a total of $5.5 million on the Cunningham project, and if I assume a 30-year borrowing at 4% interest, which we don't know what the interest rate will be, but just throw that out there. My math gives me a annual impact on the budget of $320,000 and change, $320,000. Does that sound about right?
I think I had it as closer to between 400 and 450, but
Ooh, okay.
At a 30-year and at 4%.
For $5.5 million? Okay,
Yeah.
I may have done something wrong, or you're probably more sophisticated. So, okay. So you're saying 400,000 a year?
Yeah, like 400 grand.
Okay, not appearing in the budget necessarily next year or even the year after that, but appearing in the budget in the foreseeable future. Okay, thank you for that. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I think this question came up a few meetings ago. Does this address the people who are interested in this?
And it's been a discussion point at the Capital Improvement Planning Committee where we talked about this project a couple times, and some of the feedback has certainly been this is our capital budget on a year-to-year basis is replacement equipment, $1 million for roads, facilities improvement projects and maintenance projects. This is outside the norm of our capital budget on a year-to-year basis and would be a significantly higher impact than had been contemplated when we were kind of preparing some of our capital forecasts. So there will have to be, the schools and other departments may not be able to afford as much in terms of capital spending if this is eating up a bit more of that budget over the next couple of years. And I know the schools are going to go back to take a closer look at their requests and figure out what truly are their priorities, so we can map that out a little bit better to try to mitigate and at least kind of understand and forecast the impacts better.
Thank you.
You have Brian and then Allison.
Yeah, Brian.
Whoa. Thank you. I know that, I certainly know that Carl Cunningham are under stress for space. And I think that maybe a lot of people have a little bit of sticker shock with this amount of money for those those 2 floors. When I mentioned it before, for the first round, I thought that was sticker shock. There was belief that we had to bid with union contractors, that there was a law, but I want to just clarify, I don't think there is a law that says that. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. And are we opening up for bids for multiple companies that should pay prevailing wage? Are we going to do that? Do you know?
Yeah, so it's public construction, Chapter 149. It would be a design bid builds, the design will go out, contractors will bid based on that design. And any contractor, it's a better question for the architect in terms of if there's going to be any certification requirements. Under $10 million in Massachusetts, they don't have any contractors don't have to be previously certified by the state Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. So generally, on a smaller dollar project under $10 million, contractors who are qualified, and there can be a pre-qualification process, and whether they'll go through that in this project or not, I'm not sure. You can bid on the project. They will have to pay prevailing wage, and the bid docs will include the prevailing wage documents, so folks know what those are. But that's the requirement where it comes to, yeah. There is a change in state law that now allows cities and towns to enter into project labor agreements that would more narrowly limit the field potentially. It's not a requirement that cities and towns do that. That has been one of the changes that got some headlines in recent months is that change. That just allows cities and towns, if they so choose, to enter into project labor agreements, but it doesn't require it. The requirement that remains is prevailing wage.
Okay, thanks. Who does manage that bidding process?
Typically on projects like this, the staff and the project designer will work on preparing the bids, getting the bids out, and evaluating the bids.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Allison?
Hi, so for years we've used free cash, and as you know, I've been on the committee for a couple of years it's always been understood that we should be using it for one-time expenses. And being part of the school budget for multiple years, we've used free cash for positions that would eventually need to be budgeted, which for many of us, we were against doing that because obviously it would put onto our bottom line. This is one of those things doing Cunningham that we could have essentially over the last 3 or 4 years kept that money and could have used free cash for. Am I correct in saying that? That's a one-time, it would have benefited to hold on to it. And we're again at this 4 to 5 million free cash again this year. So if we had taken the last couple of years, essentially we could have paid for our short-term space with the free cash, correct?
Yes, it should free cash be used for one-time capital items. Yes, and could free cash be used to fund a project like this? Sure. I wouldn't have ever really recommended a $5.5, even a $2 million project be funded with free cash. This is something where that cost can be issued. On facilities projects, you're allowed to issue bonds for up to 30 years. This is a project that's meant to last 30 years. There's an argument that it makes sense to issue debt like that to pay for major investments. It's a burden that would be, it's a benefit that will be experienced by people for the next 30 years. So people who are going to be living here and paying taxes over the next 30 years should contribute to that, rather than using cash as a major down payment on something like this. That's not necessarily something I would recommend. We are using cash for capital. Last year was 1.2 million. The year before that, close to $1 million. We're targeting around $1 million again in the fiscal 26 budget. So there will be other items in the regular capital budget that goes to town meeting in May that will be funded through free cash, but are on bigger projects that are more expensive, we typically are able to get good interest rates. Our last bond that went out in August was, a 30-year note at about 3.5%. So we get good rates, and trying to take advantage of that for a project of this size. Again, we wouldn't typically pay for something this upfront in cash.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that thought process, but that's just additionally, for short-term space has been an issue for the town. Modulars that are permanent, stuff like that. Those are things that we could have used those free cash rather than putting it into the budget line. I would think that would be more beneficial than a reoccurring professional expense. Even though it's like a bigger, the initial build out could have been done over a couple of years where you aren't doing like a $5 million right away. You would have had like the starting build out because they started at, they had a couple million. We could have already used that free cash from last year and the year before to start the project. So it wouldn't have been something that, we're doing at a higher amount. It could have been a progression of that free cash spend to handle short-term space as it progressed for construction each year. That's just something like I think would have been for overall for the town that would have benefit for years to come by doing that. My other question too is like the feasibility study commencing in spring, but yet the project doesn't start till May. Why would we put that 1.5 where we have more time to for the amount where we could essentially how is that being, I heard you had said, but how are we paying for the 1.5? Is that coming out of that's coming out of the overall, like we might get it back, but we have to obviously initially pay for the cost. But is it better for the budget for it to be longer, put out longer? Like we don't really need to do it in the spring to put it on the books. We could essentially put it in the fall or by the winter.
Oh, and back to that's questions about the MSBA feasibility study. So yes, the town of Milton quote unquote eligibility period with the MSBA where we need to accomplish these tasks, including getting an appropriation, starts May 1st. And the town has 270 days to complete all those tasks. So could the feasibility study appropriation go to the annual town meeting or some fall town meeting and we still would be in the timeline? The answer to that is yes. But we felt we have a town meeting. This has been a project folks have been talking about for a long time. This would be a way to get this out of the way, show the MSBA that the town is prepared and ready to be working on this with MSBA once it gets approval to move into the next phase. It won't have an impact on the budget because we don't anticipate any expenses being paid out of that appropriation for some time now. We have to procure the project team before any study will commence. That will take 9 months to 12 months for that to happen. But to your point, that appropriation could take place at a later date. It doesn't affect the budget anyway because we won't be borrowing against it or spending any of that money for a long time. The impacts won't show up for a while. Any eligible costs in addition for that feasibility study will be reimbursed by the MSBA at our reimbursement rate, which is right now around 45%, but not yet final.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I can understand. I just would like us to focus on our short-term and financial, I guess, my opinion, on the committee, the importance of that's been kind of put on, should have been a priority for the past couple of years. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Any other questions from Mr. Milano on any subject that it appears in our draft warrant? Schools? Anything? Okay. Mr. Milano, thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate you coming in, filling the gap, and being available to answer all these random questions.
No, anytime. And I'll be listening in tomorrow. So if there's questions that I can probably let them know. I may not be around right at 7, but I'll be jumping on the meeting once I'm able to, and I'll be on Zoom. So if anything comes up that would be helpful with tomorrow night as well.
Your ears might start ringing right at 7. So, but thank you very much, Mr. Milano. Like I said, we appreciate your the extra time, and maybe we'll talk tomorrow. But
Thanks, Nick.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Very good. And Mr. Chair, the formalities with Mr. Milano.
Oh, come on, we're on the record. We got to be formal.
I appreciate it, though.
Yeah, Karen's taking minutes.
All right. All right. Thank you all. And obviously, if any more specific questions, feel free to reach out by email or give my office a call. And in the meantime, have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone want to discuss?
It's a lot to take in. It's a lot of potential debt to the town. I mean, that's all I keep seeing in my head is all these numbers adding, and I'm thinking of it. We were talking earlier. Just if you look at it in a stacked bar by person, it's steep. It's a lot.
It's like a cable bill. I mean, literally, like,
Which we don't pay anymore.
I don't.
looks good until all the add-ons.
Yeah, it's all add-ons now. I mean, it's all of it. 1.5, 3.5, 1.5, 1.7 for the pipes and all the stuff, and it's a lot. I mean, I think, well, a suggestion. When you do your opening narrative, I think it would be very helpful to convey the points, how we looked at it, and looking at the costs in total, right? What the total cost would be if you totaled all the articles for consideration, and then maybe talk about what the impact is to the average person who lives here, because the membership that's going to be sitting there, like, I want a school, that's all I care about, but they don't understand that this is that cost. You see, you want that, but like I think Allison brought up an amazing point about Cunningham. We've been talking about that for almost 2 years now. And they're asking for $3.5 million. It's a lot, right? These are things that keep me awake at night, thinking about taxes long term and living in this town and thinking, when you retire, it just keeps going up. And I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier. It just keeps climbing. I mean, it's big hits too, because there's no commercial offset, right? Yeah. Anyway, for consideration, happy to help you. And I know a guy named Jay who probably, and Laura could help us write this too. I think it's important. I would love to see a positioning statement when we go up there to say, this is what we took into consideration when we talk about this. I think it's important because they have no idea, right? If they, hopefully they read the warrant. Hopefully.
So property taxes are rising at an average of just under 2.5%.
Yes.
What are property values rising at?
That's a good question. They are rising, obviously. I just had my tax bill the other day I was looking at.
I looked at mine too.
But I don't know. I can't give you that number.
That for me, as a taxpayer, not a warrant committee member, that's, if it's outpacing the increase in the tax bill, then it makes economic sense. If the property tax rates are rising far in excess or at a greater rate consistently than property values, then I want to think long and hard about whether I think these are fair. It's a smart investment, right? So we want to, whether you're a business or a municipality, you want to make long-term investments that make sense, that provide a return. And so if the return is over a 50-year window, that doesn't make sense for me as a residential homeowner, right? Because I want to see that return by the time I retire.
How would you map that out? Would you do it like a line graph, looking at for the inflection point when it hits on that? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it for me, it's I'd be concerned about rates of change. we know the property tax, or it's a steady line, right? Property values are going to rise and fall, but over a 10, 15, 30-year period, if on average it is outpacing the increases in taxes, then I can say, hey, this is a trade-off that I make for being in a town that doesn't have a huge commercial tax base. If it doesn't, and my kids are no longer in schools here, then as a homeowner, I need to think, is this a town that I really should stay in long term? And I would look at it very differently if I had kids in school or in kindergarten, as opposed to kids that are one in college and one not in Milton Public Schools. So,
Awesome points.
Jay?
I'd like to pick your brain a little bit more about that. I mean, are you talking about with regards to a potential budget override, or just the normal annual 2.5%? I mean, Prop 2.5 says our taxes are going up 2.5% every year, except when we have an override.
well, let's say we in the warrant say that we think these are wise investments and we recommend that you should vote yes.
Okay.
What I would want to know as a taxpayer is why, and does it make economic sense? Not does it just feel good and because we should have strong schools. I want to be able to tie it to, does it make economic sense for the average taxpayer? And if you're a senior, what are the ways or the tools that on a fixed income that it makes sense for me, whether there's a reverse mortgage because their property taxes are rising, or the senior tax, the circuit breaker offsets it enough to make sense, or whether we say, hey, we should raise property taxes for everyone and give a residential tax exemption to get us back to net zero, or whatever. I mean, I would just want to make sure that what we are proposing isn't just going to be an additional burden 5-10 years for taxpayers in the town, because we know this is not the only large capital project that the town's going to need. And so if we're saying, hey, well, this is going to have an material impact of an additional $500,000 a year on the budget, and we've got 10 of these suckers, then as a taxpayer, I'd want to know that, are these guys just kicking a can down the road?
Okay. I guess,
Yeah, Jay.
if I can follow, specifically with the 2.5% increase, if we lived in a town where the household, the home value wasn't going up, but 2.5%, that's pretty much inflation. And if we weren't building new things, if we weren't putting in new programs, our costs would go up 2.5% just because that's what inflation is. So I guess I respectfully disagree that I'd start with is my home going up? I guess I'm contradicting myself, because your home should go up with at least inflation also. But I wouldn't ask, is my home going up faster than my taxes are going up? Because our taxes have to go up 2.5% just to keep providing the services that we have, bare minimum. So, you're making me think. I'm not sure I agree.
But I would say it depends. And so I'm satisfied with the base level of services in the town. I think we've got a great school system. There aren't too many things that are really problematic, other than, in my opinion, we don't have a large enough commercial tax base. Mm-hmm. But if we're in a town with a terrible school system and we're proposing 4% property tax increases year over year and no way of my property values to catch up, that's different. I mean, I know that Milton has a relatively strong track record in terms of property values. And so that gives me comfort that I can absorb increases in taxes without it sort of negatively impacting me in the long term, because I own my home. And so it's just one piece of the puzzle for me as a taxpayer, and the things that I'd want to know. And I would look at it differently in a different municipality or a different town. depending on where the base level of services are or what really are the long-term prospects. Like, I don't worry about the town going insolvent, at least based on what I hear. And there are other, if I were in other towns, I might think really differently about that. And again, it depends on where you are in your phase of life or whether you have kids or not. You look at it differently, but I think the average taxpayer would want to know, am I getting something in return commensurate to what they're asking for in increases?
Liz.
Judy has an answer.
Liz, then Judy.
When I look at the number of warrant articles, I'm looking at the index now. So I think if you are going to take Steve's suggestion, which I thought was a good one, some of these things, however, like the PEG Access Enterprise Fund, which we already voted, that comes out of a very specific part of the budget that has to be for that. Liquor licenses doesn't really cost anything. That's paid for by the applicant. Alcoholic beverages, Chapter 105, that's not going to really cost anything. The lead service line, I think we got a grant for, and then was 0% interest loan for part of it. The senior tax exemption is going to be offset by other taxpayers, so that is a burden on the taxpayer, but not on the town. So I think we have to look at, for each one, a lot of them aren't actually increasing the budget. Some of them are, and I think that it's very important to tell town meeting, I agree with Steve, not necessarily how people, should think about that, because to Andrew's point, it really depends on what phase you are in your life and what you value. I mean, I might value, many things that other people don't value and vice versa. But I think it's really important to explain to people sort of where the money comes from, and then say, these are the things that went into our discussion, because I think that town meeting is going to vote however town meeting wants to vote. But I think to inform the discussion so people know what we considered, realize that we looked into all of this. And to me, it's not like, 15 items, all of which are going to increase taxes. A lot of them do have money associated with them, but they come out of specific funds or are going to be offset by other things, or have, yes, you have to pay it back, but there's a grant associated with it. And so it's less than, that's my only point.
Thank you, Liz. Anyone?
Judy.
Judy.
Yeah, in regards to the comments about values about properties, that's why it's kind of important for, I guess, all taxpayers to watch that assessment, because our taxes are based like so many dollars per 1,000 of your assessment. So when your assessment goes up, that's how your taxes go up. And look at it and say, if I had to sell my house today, could I realistically receive that amount of money that I'm assessed for? So you have to kind of keep your eyes on where the market is, because let's say the assessment now is with a good market, a good value market, but things go south. You have to make sure that assessment goes down. That's where you would be paying more. If your assessment doesn't go down and your property taxes don't go down. But if your house is not going to sell at the assessed value, that's where you're overpaying your taxes. If those two things can stay relatively even, the assessment and the sell price, the actual sell price, anticipated to be closed, that's where you have to keep your eye on if you're overtaxed. That's my opinion, or my experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Allison.
we're working on the school budget, and the school budget's gone up every year percentage-wise, and we're at the highest this year, over 9% going up. So the question, like, obviously I raised I think, we have to be very concerned with the amount of living off free cash for the last 3-4 years is very concerning for me. And, I think that point of, the short term and where we could have spent that money in one-time use is now catching up with us. And now we're going to have a $9 to $10 million override. So I think with the addition of then adding a new school, I think is very concerning. I think budget taxpayer wise, and as much as our home values have been pretty steady, I think the economy has given people a little bit of a shock this year. And with the inflation of groceries and living, I know that I've been feeling it in my own home as well as other people across the board. So I think that's something that we need to be very concerned with. But the short-term problem that we have has yet to be addressed. So, I think, and that's why my frustration with the free cash, and what we spent on could have been done for the last couple of years because I do agree that our schools are managing very well with the budget and the commercial, but they continue to rise. And there really needs to be, as somebody who's dug deep into the schools, a real evaluation of positions and really, addressing, because I've said this in many, we'll get into the schools, we keep adding and adding the admin, the professional, numbers continue to go up. But like really addressing, with the budget that we have. So we're at really a high increase this year and we continue to rise. And I know that's due to other things like special needs, continues to, and there's other factors, but really digging into these budgets and these numbers and how we spend free cash is ultimately a factor in why we're in this position. That's where I think we could have added on to the schools. Modulars are, 2 to 3 million. And we really could have addressed the space issue in the past couple of years with that free cash because of, the one-time use was intended for. So I think we need to really think about, kind of how we are using our money wisely so that we don't get caught into positions that will eventually need to be budgeted and we will need an override in order to keep up. So just a few thoughts there and we can talk about that further. But that's a very big concern financially for many homes who are having a hard time paying for groceries and they are struggling right now. So we have to be mindful of our community. Thank you.
Good points, Allison. Thank you very much. Julie Joyce.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to sort of touch on that a little bit. It seems to me that the amount of add-ons and the amount of just real money, and this is real money that we're talking about, it's going to be such a roadblock for so many people. And on the other side of our mouths, we're talking about diversity and inclusion and accessibility. These are the things that keep away accessibility for an awful lot of people. And also the diversity of ages too. I mean, we're going to have, being in a community with seniors is such a gift. And having young people being able to be here. But we're going to be at a point where it's going to be, white collar, wealthy people who are going to live here while their kids are in school, and then it's, as soon as the kids are gone, we're going to have this massive turnover because that's what this community is sort of trying to do. And I hate to see that, and I hate to see us getting to a point where it's only going to be feasible for people really in their highest earning years to live here. And I grew up in the town, and there was a lot more working class people, and I just think we need to keep that in the back of our heads as we're looking at these real numbers that You know, people's, in the last year, I know myself, my homeowner's insurance almost doubled. I mean, these are some real things happening in the last 12 months, and I don't think we can ignore that. And also, we don't know what's gonna happen with the state. We have a new administration coming in. We've got all types of stuff happening. So I think if there's any time that we really need to make sure we're acting wisely, this is it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. So I did what he was talking about, looked at the property values from 2013 through 2022, the increases, he's pretty close. In 2022, the percentage change year over year in value was 3%, 3.03%. So it's pretty close to what your theory.
It was a question. Less a theory, but I mean, it's
9%.
I'm looking at 2022.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And my concern is what I assume would expect is that property values can't continue to scream at high rates. So what we're seeing over the last 10 years is a decrease from 4% to 3% year over year. And I would expect that gap tighten between, we've got a 0.5% between the 2.5 increases in property taxes and property values. And so what does that mean long term? It just means that personally would be less loose with the purse strings.
So debt's outpacing.
Because we know the 2.5% that's not going to change or unlikely to change. What is likely to change unpredictably is property market values. Like they'll either get a scream or decrease.
Would you agree, though, that the baseline changes when you add an override to that debt? So the 2.5 is on top of the new raise, which is reflective of that override, right? Mm-hmm. So that baseline is not static; it grows. So you're going to go here. You're going to stack 2.5 on top of 9 million over time. That's
outpacing the value.
That's outpacing it. That's the number.
That's the thing that's
the number
concerning.
It's huge. And so that's what I think people need to understand. I think it'd be great to have a new school. I think it's great. But that debt is growing, and there's nothing to recover it. Not excise tax. My excise tax on my Jeep was ridiculous this year in Milton. It's comical, but it's a main pillar of revenue for our town, right? And so I get it. Building permits, real estate taxes, and excise tax, and then commercial. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, and so that's not to say that I wouldn't vote for it. I just would need a really strong reason to say, hey, this is sound investment, because don't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Liz?
Sort of to agree with Allison's point. I think that, especially with respect to our annual town meeting, where I know we're going to deep dive into all of these departments' budgets. Mm-hmm. I know we had talked about sort of getting a sense of each department, and kind of, Jay had brought this up too, so to agree with both Allison and Jay, that looking kind of at, okay, just because a department, not to pick on the schools, any department you want, has spent this money last year, spent X the amount before, X the amount before, that doesn't mean that that's the right amount. And so to kind of go back and look at, okay, what are the assumptions that we're making? Are there places where people can cut? I don't know that any department would want to, but kind of taking a second look at that was something that we had discussed, and I think that might be appropriate, especially, maybe for the annual town meeting. The other thing that I wanted to say too is, I really appreciate, this is very difficult because, we look at, for example, this lead this lead requirement. So that's something that we're being mandated to do. Some of these special ed costs, which I place a lot of value in personally, but that's another thing that we don't have a choice about. We have to spend money on it. And so some of these things are challenging because they're increased mandatory costs. And I think we also have to think about, okay, as a town, what are the things that we want to spend money on as well? But we aren't seeing necessarily an increase in revenue other than just taxing people's personal property tax more, to agree with Steve as well, because we don't necessarily have a huge commercial tax base in the town. What can you do? That's where we live. So, I think that it's hard because some of this is things that we really can't do anything about. But I think that, people are going to vote whatever their values are. But I think that it's, to me, worth really considering, going forward at the fall town meeting in our individual departments that we're assigned to look at, can we talk about, okay, what is this budget sort of based on? Because every year it's going to be more and more, people are going to ask for more and more. Nobody's ever going to ask for less. But is it possible to kind of reflect back on, sort of the assumptions that were made years and years and years ago? And then also, just to summarize my other point, I just want to say, I get that it's very difficult because we have this pot that we as individual taxpayers are having to pay because of our property taxes, especially in this economy. And every additional thing that we want, especially when some of it we don't have a choice about, is being mandated, things that we might want, I get it. It's hard to sort of outline that. That doesn't mean that people aren't willing to do it anyway, but, to Julie's point, it's hard for some members of our community. So, all of that being said, I think it's tough. And I think that we, each will vote for whatever we think. But I think in our comments, really including what went into this discussion, as we talked about, I think will help inform town meeting.
Peter.
Another piece of this is, it's not like we can build our way out of this and put up more houses in the town. We're limited with what we can do, so that not only is it a problem now, but it's not going to get better, because you can't build your way out of this. If you're a town that's growing and you're building that more houses, people are clocking in, they're paying good prices, you're charging your real estate taxes on a growing base, it's kind of easy to continue to budget and build. I think in town of Milton, I haven't seen a lot of development in the 37 years I've been here. So, and I don't see that changing necessarily. So where does the additional revenue come to keep up with the added expenses that are coming, as Liz was talking about, as we're all talking about?
Yes.
I think there's want-to-haves, there's need-to-haves, and we better be doing the needs versus the wants, until and unless we can find an additional revenue stream to help out.
Yeah, Jay.
I sort of want to talk. I appreciate that this has gotten into a big picture discussion. Can I share a couple graphs?
Sure, Jay, please.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen on Zoom. And this, I believe, is a file that I sent to the whole warrant committee several months ago. A couple things, because if we're talking about, should we be spending this? Is it worth it? Are we spending too much? I get sort of untethered unless I ask myself, compared to what? So I look at peer communities, what are they doing? Because otherwise I don't know what a town should be spending. So this list of peer communities, Milton is a bit below average. This number is from a year or so ago. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing. Let me try again.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know how well you can see it, but compared to our peer communities, we're a little bit below average. And the next one I'm going to click on is sort of busy, but it tells the story. You can already look at these names and see, oh, things like Wellesley, Westwood, they have a big commercial district. So, they have more commercial and they also have higher taxes. This next graph is a little busy, but this tells this point. If you look at, going top to bottom, it's how much of our taxes are taken from residents. Side to side, it's how high are our taxes. We're at the top of, our residents are paying our taxes, but we're pretty much in the middle of, is it paid for by commercial or not? So I'm not saying I don't want more commercial development. I'm just saying there's not that much of a correlation between commercial development and lowering our taxes. I won't click on everything, but debt service, for example, right now we're paying $150 in debt service per resident. Now this number is from a year or two ago. It doesn't reflect all the things we're looking at tonight. It certainly doesn't reflect any new school, but we're starting out pretty good compared to our peers with our debt service. If the things we add tonight brings us up, we might still be below average compared to our peers. And then, of course, there's discussion of schools, which is, brings you to per pupil spending. I realize you can't tell which town is which because I colored them all gray, but what's our per pupil spending and how has that been increasing? Yes, that's been increasing, but look at all of our peers. All of our peers, their per pupil spending is going up, and it's all higher than ours. And if I start out, just say, okay, 2018, start at $1, how has it grown? Our per pupil spending has grown less than all but 1 or 2 compared to all of our peers. So, it's hard to know what's appropriate. And I won't go on and on because this is not a general budget meeting. But, when we're asking what's appropriate, let's keep in mind of what do the other towns do.
Brian.
Yeah, a couple things. Just, I was going to mention this, but on that graph, Jay, those towns that are listed aren't necessarily our abutting towns. They seem to be like, some of them look like from well-to-do communities.
Correct.
But they're not even like, necessarily close to us. But I wasn't going to bring that up. But my concern is, I know we have to do something, and I think most people from the concern are supportive of the schools. But my concern is, is the money being spent wisely or properly? Like, I think the Cunningham project is like 11,000 square feet. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong. But it came out to like $500 something a square foot. And the average cost of an office building, and I know it's not an office, but an office should be theoretically more expensive, I think, than a school, is about $350 in Boston. So it seems like a high number, and I've done a lot of construction projects, and I got sticker shock from it. I was shocked it was going to be that much money. And I think that we should really take a look at the bidding process on this. I think that I get concerned that, we never looked at modulars before. And I know Dr. Carroll mentioned at the last meeting, she said, oh yeah, we're going to start looking at modulars now. And I really think that that's something that should have been done a few years ago. And if they're looking at it, does that change what we want to do? And if a new school is built, does that change what we're going to do? And I'm not sure we have all the answers, but those are my biggest concerns.
Thank you, Brian. Great, a lot of stuff. I want to go back to the senior tax exemption. I want to get a pulse from the committee on a vote on that article tonight. And do we think we can do a vote on this tonight? I know there's been a lot of talk about language change and concerns about this and that, but do we think we're in a position to maybe make a recommendation for a vote on language, maybe a vote overall? Liz?
So for me, because Mr. Milano hasn't had a chance to talk to the select board, obviously, because we just brought up some of these issues tonight, And the select board is meeting next week. And I don't know that we'll have time between when the select board meets and when, to be able to make a vote and get it in the warrant on time. I personally would say, let's have a vote, because town meeting can always amend it on the floor. That's just me. I would say, yes, I am ready to vote.
Agreed.
Okay. Anybody have, okay, so I'm gonna take the lead here. That's a vote on the article as written.
Yeah.
And submitted by our select board, the language they approved. Okay, so do I hear any feelings about amending or removing or adding language to this
Can I-
article?
Can I share the diagram I showed you? Just
Sure.
so
This is good for an educational purpose, especially as we move forward to the annual town meeting.
So I want to share something that this may be how, I'm actually going to hit share. This may be how our evening could work out. I was just sketching this out. I was thinking, just people were asking, how does it work procedurally? One way it could work, what I would suggest is somebody makes a motion. As presented by the select board, we recommend that the town vote to authorize by the select board, blah, 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 blah. Once that motion is on the floor, but before we vote for it, someone can say, I would like to propose an amendment. Let's remove section G. The warrant committee votes yes or no on that amendment. Somebody else says, I would like to make a second amendment. I would like to change the word and to the word or. The warrant committee votes yes or no on that amendment, and then we vote on the main motion. That's sort of a procedural thing. That's how I can see this working out and getting the feel of the warrant committee.
Jay, thank you very much. And just to take it one step deeper, that would be the language that would appear in the warrant. Okay, it's our amended language. Okay, in the comment, we talk to that. And I used with Jay earlier, the 65. We wanted it to be 70, right? We changed that, and then we tell town meeting why we made that change. So that would be the procedure. So I really appreciate Jay mapping that out. As to his point and what we've been talking about, do I hear a motion for any amendment as to the senior tax break article as it appears?
Are we first going to have a motion of
To approve the article.
to approve it as written?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Greater motion to approve the article.
I'd make a motion to approve the article as written by the select board.
Wait a second?
Do you need a second?
Peter? Okay, we're ready for a vote? Jay?
Well, before we vote on that, I was, after the motion is made, and
Yes.
before we vote on
I'm
it,
sorry.
I was going to propose the amendments. So I would like to propose an amendment to what is on the floor. And my amendment would be to, well, I'll just pull this up and share it again. My amendment would be to remove section G, which was the part where it said the Board of Assessors may deny an application if they have excessive assets. And if I could, I think we've discussed this a lot, if I can say just really briefly.
Sure.
I think my colleague Lori said earlier tonight, if I can paraphrase, or what you said to what I understand, is it's never going to be perfect. There are going to be mistakes. We're going to exclude some people who should get it, and we're going to include some people who should not. And
Is there a motion on this amendment? Is this a motion for an amendment, or is this discussion on the original motion?
So motion for an amendment to the article.
I understand that, but there's commentary. It should just be a motion.
Yeah, I'm speaking to the amendment.
Seconded, and then opened up for discussion. Jay, you're jumping ahead. That's
Okay,
my
sorry.
opinion, Mr. Chair.
You're saying, so I make the amendment, and I guess it has to be seconded. If it will be.
Normally on the floor of town meeting, the moderator will let people explain why
Yes, usually that he
they're
does.
amending it. Otherwise, we don't really know why we're doing it.
Yeah.
But it's up to you.
No, so Judy, he's gonna say why he's doing it. because that's how town meeting works. So Jay,
Okay.
why are you moving?
Real quick, it's just both of these are, we might make the mistake of excluding people who should get it, or we might make the mistake of including people who should not get it. And I'd rather make the second mistake. I'd rather make the mistake of including too many people. And that's all I'll have to say about either of these amendments.
I have a slightly different take, which is to keep G, but amend that to give the Board of Assessors discretion to either hear an appeal or exclude someone based on any owner, any member, any owners of the property in the applicant group, in the application process.
Okay, so there's a comment to Jay's.
Friendly amendment to your amendment.
So we're gonna talk as to the, so there's a comment that a member has a difference to the amendment. Does anybody want to speak to Jay's amendment?
We're voting on his amendment first. Okay. You need a second? I second it. So we can vote on it.
I mean, it's sort of, I'm trying to get I'm trying to get a sense of process. And so if we, let's say we vote on the article as is, and we say no. And then we vote on Jay's, and we say no. And we vote on mine, and we say no. Like, we're gonna do this serially. I would rather hear the universe of options and then vote at the end. Is that, or, I mean, what's a process?
Which I think is.
We have to go through, we have to vote in each amendment. and then we-
In order, oh gosh,
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
That's the rules,
Okay.
like, and then the town meeting, then you gotta go back to the amendment as written, and then you go through, like, yes, it is a very, so that's why I'm saying we're gonna, Karen, do you have something?
Oh, no, you have hands, that's all. Julie and Judy, when you get to it.
No, here, let's settle this now. Julie,
Hi, real quick, I'm sorry. Jay, this question is for you. Just want to make sure I understood you. Did you just say that you wanted to fully remove the asset test?
Yes. Fully remove
Okay.
what's written in section G, yes.
Okay, thank you.
is it Judy?
Yes, I'm not gonna be quick. To remove the asset defeats the purpose and intent of this article. I'm a senior. I roam around with seniors, as well as other age groups. I like young people's ideas. I like to listen to them. I'm not exclusive to my peer group. However, to grant a tax exemption, in a way, to somebody that has the means to own more than one property is not where the intent of this article is. As a senior, I have owned other properties. And in fact, that is my situation today as I speak. I have a Milton property and I have another property in the state. I do not feel that any senior that owns more than one property should be able to have this tax break. I feel very strongly about this. Because if you are able to own another property, you are able to pay your tax bill. Again, I speak from experience, speak from my age group, and it is a very necessary component of this article. The spirit and intent of the article will be compromised if this is removed from section G. And that's it. That's all, folks.
Thank you very
Anyone
much.
remember that? Saturday morning cartoons? Da-da-da-da. That's all, folks.
certainly
See, none
do.
of you are old enough to do that. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Judy. Any other questions or any other comments on Jay's friendly amendment?
This is a question. Oh, sorry, Liz. Go ahead.
Liz, why don't you go ahead?
No, that's okay. I don't think I don't agree that it gets rid of the asset test. I agree with Jay that it gets rid of section G. Somebody who's an applicant who owns the property, is domiciled at the property, would still have to meet the circuit breaker. There's still an asset requirement that's built into the circuit breaker exemption. You still have to meet 1, 2, 3, 4. This part, section G, provides the Board of Assessors with a new ability that, my understanding, Mr. Milano said they don't normally have, because normally they just apply exactly what the statute says. Here, they're having a new ability to use in their discretion based on a determination that's yet to be made and a policy that will be in place later to deny an application if they find that the applicant has excessive assets. And we talked about the fact that we didn't know what that meant. I still think that there's a means test and an asset test that would be somebody who's the taxpayer who's applying for this thing has to be eligible for the circuit breaker, which itself has a means test. So I'm not saying how people should vote for it. I'm just saying I don't really agree with that.
That's a good point.
Can I?
Sure, Lori.
I think the
Well, actually, wait a minute.
To that point, the circuit breaker does not prove that you have assets that are bricks and mortars. It does not delve into the fact that you have multiple properties. I went through that circuit breaker today like I had to fill it out. And I go, nobody wants to know about my other property. So say everything fit in all the boxes, I could apply for circuit breaker, go down to the town hall, not tell anyone about my other property, get a relief on this property, and then say, oh, that was a good deal, huh? I'm against this. You're not looking at it through the lens of where the circuit breaker actually is. Plus, take this into consideration. Nick Milano was with us tonight, and he says the towns that have this provision consider asset review only to be excess property. So the circuit breaker takes care of all your bank accounts, and your income, and your IRAs, and your Fidelity accounts. Maybe they missed your Cayman Island account, but they don't check how many properties you have. I could have 10 properties and still, perhaps, get through the circuit breaker. Why would I be entitled to a tax break in my town that I am now going to take my particular tax break and parcel it out to all the other taxpayers in town, my little portion? I understand it's a very little portion. Why would I do that? Why would that should be allowed? It shouldn't be. The taxpayers in this town should not take on a burden, however small it is, because you have multiple properties and it doesn't show on the circuit breaker, and you're going to pick up a portion of their tax break? No. Very unfair to the citizens and taxpayers of this town. And it's immoral, I think, too, because you could get away with it if you don't have that guideline. I can't think of what I want to say. Oversight. So I got a house down the Cape, I got a house here, and I'm going to not claim that asset that doesn't show in the circuit breaker, and then just, my neighbor who's struggling, they have young kids, they just bought a house. Where's the morality in that? There is none. Thank you.
Brian has his hand up.
Peter.
I'd like to state that we haven't made this up from whole cloth. This is not the town's idea of, hey, let's do this. It's been done in other towns. It's been done exactly the way it's been laid out here. And it seems to be working there. We have a lot of ways this could go sideways. But I don't know, I think we spent way too much time talking about this issue when it actually is working in other towns. It's here, it's a good idea. We all agree that we want to give seniors a break. We want to keep seniors here in the town. We could be here till midnight. We're going to be dancing around on this, which is why I would like to see us vote on this as it stands this evening, being right now.
I thank you for your comment, Peter. We have Brian wants to chime in.
I'll be quick. I do actually agree with Jay. I think the whole definition of excessive assets is really arbitrary. I mean, it could be a boat, it could be motorcycles, I don't know. And I think the issue with people worrying about people having just too many properties, like you have to be paying, like this is such a low income group, you have to be paying taxes on all those properties. So you could theoretically, you could have a small piece of property that you have inherited from your parents or something, and maybe it doesn't cost that much, and then you're booted out of this. And I think that's going to happen more than anything else. Also, the third thing is the Board of Assessors. Like you're putting this burden on them that they don't have right now. And who's making that decision? What's an excessive asset? You know? Now, I don't want to belabor this either, but that's my 2 cents.
Brian, thank you very much. Okay, does anybody else want to speak to Jay's amendment to the home rule petition for seniors mean tested tax exemptions? Liz.
Yes, I have my hand raised.
Okay, Judy, it'll be Liz, then you.
If you want to really look at it, any senior could go in and say, no, they don't have any property. Sign the sheet, and it's a done deal. They still get the tax break. You need to leave that in there for future amendments, as other towns find, little hiccups here and there, and you want to leave your options open. And it doesn't mean that just because you fill out a form saying you have another property, it doesn't say there that they're going to deny you. It does not say anywhere, we will deny you. But it's an option that's in place should there be hiccups.
Thank you, Judy. Liz.
So to Brian's point about what an excessive asset is, if the select board were concerned, I understand that other towns have implemented this exact same thing. I personally think Milton is a special town that should feel free to implement its own rules. And while I would prefer to go home as well, I know that the more we talk about it now, hopefully the less we'll have to talk about it at town meeting, and that's a lot more people having to stay up. So in the spirit of trying to save everybody else from staying up late into the night thinking about it, I am a firm believer that if it were the select board's intention to say that if you own more than one property, that either you are automatically denied or you may be denied by the Board of Assessors, it would say that. Here it says that they may find that you have excessive assets. Excessive assets is not defined. Nick Milano said that the Board of Assessors would have to then create a policy. That's not something that they normally do. To Brian's point, I also don't want to overburden the Board of Assessors. Lori had mentioned, I know that we're tight on time, but Lori, you had mentioned before about asking the Board of Assessors how they feel about it and whether they would feel overburdened by this. I don't know. I think it's worth discussion.
Okay. We're going to vote on that.
And a vote.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now's the time for this. So Liz, I appreciate the comment. Was there anyone else with their hand up?
No.
Okay, let's do a vote on Jay's amendment. Okay, so Jay moved to amend the home rule petition for senior means tested tax exemption by removing section G in its entirety. Okay, that is the motion on the floor. It's been seconded by Liz.
Yeah, so we can have a vote.
Okay, so I'd ask Karen to, let's have a vote.
Sure.
Please poll the committee.
Tom,
No.
Steve,
No.
Lori,
No.
Liz,
Actually, no.
Jay,
Yes.
Allison,
No.
Julie, Joyce,
No. No.
Andrew,
No.
Julia Maxwell,
No.
Peter,
No.
Brian,
Yes.
Ron,
No.
Judy,
Yes. No.
no?
No is my answer. No is my final answer.
The motion does not carry.
Okay. Okay, now we're back to the original motion as written and submitted by the select board. Do I hear any amendments or any motions regarding that language? I saw Jay first.
Oh.
Just because I saw
I
him.
had a point of order, not an amendment.
Point of order.
If Andrew now wanted to propose his motion to that section, you could, if you wanted.
Yeah, of course.
I would like to ask one really quick question, which is, if
Okay,
there's
I gotta stop. I recognize Jay to speak. I appreciate the back and forth. No, it's fine. Jay, what did you have to say?
I was going to make an amendment.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, you asked, okay,
So you're making an amendment.
unless you would prefer to hear from another member right now.
Well, I wanted to hear from him because I knew
Okay.
that's what he was going to do.
Yes.
So do I hear any other amendments to the language of the article as written?
no, I just have one quick question.
A question.
Is if this is broken, regardless of what we vote on, it could be remedied next year, right?
It can be remedied at any time, either by the select board,
Okay.
the board of assessors,
So there's
or a citizen's
there's no
petition.
permanent harm.
There's no permanent harm unless anyone else can see it other side. This can always be brought back at any point the select board sees fit, or they're asked to by another committee,
Okay.
i.e. the assessors.
That's all I needed to know.
Okay, Liz, point of order.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, town meeting could decide to amend it at town meeting as well.
They also could.
And if you think this is chaotic,
That's why I'm not a town meeting member.
This is so smooth.
Yes.
Jay is
I'm not telling them to do that. I'm just
Absolutely
saying if
right.
they want to, they could.
I thank you. Thank you for the point of order. And Jay,
I would like to propose a second amendment,
please.
which is in Part D, where it says, refers to a person that has been domiciled and owned a residential unit for blah, 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 at least 10 years. Change the and to or. And also the word in seemed to be missing, so I'm adding that in. So it would be domiciled in or owned a residential unit of property for 10 years. And I think we've discussed this topic a bit, so I don't have anything else to say about it at this time.
Okay. So, as to Jay, has a motion on the floor for a home rule petition for a seniors means tested tax exemption to strike the word and in subsection D, in subsection D of section D, and replace that with an or. So the sentence in D would read, the applicant taxpayer has been domiciled or owned a residential unit of real property in the town of Milton, X, Y, and Z. Is that accurate, Jay?
Domiciled in. I'm also adding the word in,
Domicile.
but that's just like a typo.
Okay. Okay, that's the motion. Do I see a second?
Yeah, I second that.
Liz seconds the motion. Let's put that to a vote. Jay's amendment as it applies to section 2, subsection D of the senior tax exemption. Liz.
I'm so sorry. May we comment about that? Or are we just voting?
Well,
I had a comment about
We
it. very
can,
brief.
no, we can engage comment. I had assumed as the chair we had spoken to it enough, but feel free to comment.
Well, I wanted to say that this is the reason why I didn't vote in favor of amending section G. So,
Okay.
because noting Judy's concern, I was concerned about someone who owned multiple units of real property too. And I know I was explaining about sort of why we might want to have that amendment, but I personally think that if you say in, domiciled in, or owned, my concern would be someone who hasn't lived here at all and then comes in the 10th year. And so that would be the thing that I would think the Board of Assessors would be able to prevent against. So that's why I didn't vote to remove section G, personally.
Okay. Thank you. I
Point of
appreciate it.
clarification, Jay. So it is a taxpayer, so it's a homeowner who is either domiciled here for 10 years. Is that correct?
It is a current-
We're not talking about renters.
It is a current homeowner, but if they bought their home yesterday, but they previously rented for 10 years, they would be included. Or, as the example I gave, a minister who retires here.
I got it.
Yeah, okay, so that's the intent,
Point of clarification.
and we all have
Thank you.
our opinions.
Okay, any other comment on any comment? Or
I have
on
one,
Jay's amendment or Jay's
if I
amendments?
may.
Judy?
Liz, thank you. Liz, I understand exactly where you're going with language. The language as proposed needs to be changed because, as I understand this amendment, as Liz pointed out, domiciled, what was it, domiciled or, repeat the exact language of the amendment again. It could be somebody that's a non-resident,
Yeah,
the way
the-
the language is. Liz is absolutely correct on that. So the language
No, not as is.
opens a can of worms that,
Finish up, Judy?
if you were domiciled in the ownership portion. Liz is right.
Check out C, check out part C. So if I may say, part C of this proposed law says it has to be the domicile of the taxpayer today. So maybe you weren't living here for the previous 10 years, but you got to be living here today if you want this tax break. And I think that addresses what the member just raised.
Did you, Andrew, have a comment?
No, I agree that Jay's accurate in saying that lived, and I just want to be clear that I think the spirit of the law is to protect homeowners from being forced out of the community because they no longer can afford the taxes on it. And that is different than a renter in my mind.
Yep.
A renter is, well, it'd be great to have someone stay in the community. I mean, to be harsh, we're in a capitalist society. Like they don't have an entitlement in perpetuity to stay in the town. As unfortunate as it is.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody have any other comment as to Jay's amendment? Seeing no other hands raised, let's put it to a vote. Right? Jay's amendment to section D of section 2 of the article. Karen, you can read the roll.
Sure. Tom?
No.
Steve?
No.
Lori?
No.
Elizabeth? Liz?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Allison?
No.
Julie?
No.
Andrew?
No.
Julia?
Yes.
Peter?
No.
Brian?
No.
Ron? Ron?
No.
Judy?
No,
The motion does not carry.
Okay, now we are back to the original article as written and submitted by the select board. Do I see any hands for any further amendments or language changes as to this article on tax relief? Liz?
Can you pull that back up? I'm so sorry. I would propose that it said, Part D change would say, has been domiciled and owned a residential unit of real property in the town of Milton for at least 10 of the past 15 consecutive years.
Okay, so your amendment would be reading in part, in the town of Milton for at least 10 out of the past 15 years? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, out of the past 15 years, right? So is that the exact language?
I don't know where consecutive would fit in. I
Oh,
guess
no,
you would have to
yeah.
delete it.
Consecutive, yeah.
Say
Okay,
the
then
last.
yes. That's not what I said, but you're correct, so I agree with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I didn't mean to correct
No,
you.
no,
friendly, but-
that was
So for
taken.
town
very
of Milton
arbitrary.
for at least 10 of the past 15 years prior to filling an application for this exemption.
Noting that C requires that the parcel be your current domicile. Yes.
Okay. Do I hear a second to Liz's amendment to change, to add language to subsection D of section 2 of the article? Is there a second?
I think Julia's second.
Julia, second.
Yep.
Do we have a discussion? Yeah.
My opinion is the article as written is imperfect. However, knowing that it could be modified if we are excluding a large number of people, I would much prefer to adopt the language as is than to pick an arbitrary number like 10 out of 15, 10 out of the last 15 years. And what's the difference between that and 12 or 17 or 12 out of the last 18 years? And so I would rather see the discretion in Article G, give the assessors some discretion. I would prefer to see it go in both ways, but let's start with that and then change it if it is unfairly excluding a number of people or the budget allows the program to be expanded. I mean, I'd love to see it expanded to a larger group, but right now we're facing some real practical realities. So.
Jay, did you have a comment or?
I'm just taking a fresh look at the language not amended, that you have to have lived in and owned a piece of property for at least 10 consecutive years prior to filing an application. Now I'm thinking that means if you lived here for 10 years and then you moved away and then you moved back, you're still fine because you lived here for 10 consecutive years prior to filing an application. Am I reading that correctly?
It doesn't say immediately prior.
Has been domiciled and owned.
Yeah, okay. So between 1980 and 1989, I domiciled and owned a house here. That was 10 consecutive years prior to my filing this application.
And then you move back and are currently domiciled. Yes.
So
It doesn't say immediately prior. It just says prior at some point prior.
I hadn't realized that before, but if I'm reading that correctly, I think that addresses the concern that Ms. Dillon had and the reason for making her amendment. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, as the language, for at least 10 consecutive years prior to filing.
Yes, so in that case, if you lived here for 30 years You moved away for 5. You come back.
Yeah.
Technically, it was 10 years prior. Now, is it supposed to say 10 years immediately prior? I don't know. One could fight about that. But in that case, the way that it's written, yes, I would make that argument if I were a person applying for it, sure.
Sounds like the assessors may have some more.
We get
Does
paid
that-
by paper.
Does that get rid of the need for your amendment? Mr.
Yeah, so I think
Yes.
that's,
Yes.
So
In
you're
which case, I
withdrawing the
withdraw it, yeah.
You withdraw?
Yeah,
so the amendment.
Jay.
So Liz's
appreciate you.
amendment to section 2, subsection D has been withdrawn on the record. We are now back to the original article as submitted, drafted, and submitted by the select board, Lori. And I'm, any further, as the moderator will ask, any further discussion as to this article? Seeing no hands raised, do I hear a motion for a vote? On the article as written?
I motion.
You need another motion?
Yeah, we
Oh,
let's.
you have one.
You have to do
I
another.
seconded it.
Okay. So we're back to the original motion. For the motion to approve the language submitted by the select board.
That's
Okay.
Right.
Vote. Karen, please.
Tom,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Liz,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Judy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Can
Thank
we-
you all.
Are we allowed to comment and point out that flaw to the?
Yes.
I actually see it as a flaw in
Okay,
the
I'm gonna-
language.
yeah, we're gonna assign comments tomorrow and we can field questions and I'll be available all weekend to field them too. Okay, I don't think it's a good idea to entertain any more business tonight. Are we agreed on that?
I hope.
think
Let's
so.
keep
Yes.
going. Let's
I
keep
think we're on a
going.
roll. It's
Come on, let's stay till midnight. I mean, like,
I am always prepared to stay.
why wait for tomorrow when it's only 2 hours away?
Prepared to stay until midnight. Look at me.
Let's wrap it. I'm gonna do work when I go home. So,
Same.
honestly, we have 5 articles remaining, 3 schools, the 2 liquor. Okay. Mine thought of the chair. I think we can get through the liquor ones pretty easy. Schools, probably not so much. So 5 articles tomorrow.
I think one of the alcohol ones will take a lot of discussion, or might, and one will not.
Yes, sure.
So,
We just a little straw poll on the first, on the 5 liquor
Yeah.
licenses. I mean, that should not.
Do you think we're ready to vote
I'm ready to
on
vote
the
on
5
that.
liquor
Yes.
licenses?
Yes, I'm ready to vote
Let's
on
get
that.
one more.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it
Thank
now.
you.
Let it
I
ride.
appreciate
Let's
you.
go.
Are there any hands? Are there any
Let it
hands
roll.
as to that article and staying on the vote? Are we all good with that, Zoom audience?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so as to the home rule petition for additional liquor licenses, do I hear a motion for a vote on the article?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Karen, can we put this to a vote to the
Sure,
committee?
Give me 1 second.
Sure.
You guys are moving fast.
She wasn't expecting it.
No.
That's in the
It's good
spring.
though.
That's the spring, the last.
Hoping to go home. Already shutting down your computer.
Who seconded, who moved in?
Peter
Second.
and Andrew.
Okay.
Seconded.
Okay. Tom,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Liz,
Yes.
Jay,
yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Brian. Brian,
I think you said,
we may have lost somebody. I thought Brian is gone.
He's already drinking.
Yes. Is that me?
Ron? Ron?
I think Brian said yes, and this is Ron, I say yes.
Oh, I couldn't hear, sorry.
Okay, and Ron says yes as well.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Judy? Judy? I think we were one down, so she may be no.
Left.
All right, the motion carries.
Excellent.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you, committee.
Anything else?
How about the zoning map one?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Is that on the agenda?
The agenda said,
Any-
and anything else
The
that will be in
housekeeping,
the.
yeah, the housekeeping article.
Okay.
I like it.
Thanks, Jay.
I appreciate this committee so much.
I'm not going to be tomorrow, so yeah.
Even though we don't know if there are any citizen-specific petitions.
Okay.
We're getting up the hill, but we're cruising down it right now, I'll tell you.
Okay, so these are, as explained by Mr. Milano, there are 2 articles submitted by the planning board. One's to,
Actually, I don't think it says vote.
no, it doesn't.
It doesn't. The vote was only to,
Sorry, Jay.
Persons.
Okay, so I appreciate,
not with vote, but I could revise the agenda.
Okay.
Because it's already posted, I could do a revision.
okay, what we're gonna do is for tomorrow, Karen was very nice, our clerk, she's gonna amend the agenda. It's gonna be reposted in the assignment with an amendment. The amendment will indicate vote. And we can include, if you wanna include, Karen, all of the articles, including the ones we haven't even seen yet.
Got it.
We could do that
In
too.
particular, we're looking at the overlay, the zoning.
Yeah, I would add zoning bylaws amendment, the zoning map, the site plan review, accessory dwelling units. I would just, essentially the entire
I'm gonna do it right here.
article.
When we're done.
Okay. Okay, so
Thank you.
tomorrow, we have 4. Okay, so I just ask you, just bring all your questions for schools. Like, let's air it out tomorrow. Let's get try to settle the issue and see, I trust we'll have a vote on some of these others. These will be easy votes. The schools, I expect some discussion. So, Liz.
Can you remind us who all is coming regarding the schools tomorrow? Everyone.
Everyone,
Anyone.
including Dr. Burrows, will be here.
So the school committee chair,
School committee chair will be here.
school
Mark
building
Loring.
committee chair.
I don't know if Mr. O'Rourke is going to be here. I'm going to have to check my email to see who was going to be here.
Okay.
Do you need someone here specifically?
No, I'm just curious. I have
It'll
a
be
lot
like
of
this-
curiosity.
Oh, no. Yeah, it'll be like the same school group. Dr. Burrows had a meeting elsewhere. He rescheduled that meeting to be here. So he's obviously very interested in the message to the warrant committee. But I'll touch base.
Do you know about next week?
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll know tomorrow.
That's okay.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Motion
Yes.
to adjourn?
Yes.
Steve, do I have a second?
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow at 7.